every country has its own special day of celebration. A public holiday or some other commemorative event where the people join together to celebrate their unique quirk of their collective history. America celebrates its independence on July the 4th. India, its independence on the 15th of August. Australia Day is the 26th of January. Canada Day the 1st of July. And for Cyprus, its Independence Day lies on the 1st of October. All of these public holidays revolve around a singular facet of history. The dates signify their separation, either politically or at the very least geographically, from the United Kingdom, or as was the British Empire. Between the 16th and 18th centuries, England, acting as the primary ruling nation of the United Kingdom, established the largest empire to have ever existed in our planet's history. In 1920, it spanned 35.5 million kilometres of ground, and approximately 25% of the world's population lived under some form or another of British rule, either directly controlled or with mercantile, legal, linguistic or cultural domination in one form or another. But what national commemoration do the remaining people of the United Kingdom have to celebrate? The dissolution of the empire is undoubtedly a good thing, but it's not one for national celebration in the UK itself. A foreign observer might assume that it would be the Queen's birthday. After all, as of 2020, we still have a reigning monarch who officially still holds their role as the head of the state. Although this is largely a ceremonial position, a continued presence who ensures continuity and stability behind the scenes across changing political regimes, but doesn't actually in effect do anything. However, the Queen's birthday is not a public holiday. All that happens on the Queen's birthday is that an event happens called the Trooping of the Colour, a ceremonial parade through Horse Guards Parade that celebrates the regiments of both the British and the Commonwealth armies. Each country of the United Kingdom has their own patron saint, St George, St Andrew, St David, St Patrick for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland respectively, and this means that each of the devolved nations in the UK have their own national holiday, although again, these are not public holidays. No businesses or banks close. Anyone who wants to celebrate needs to book time off their employer almost like any other day. Really, British people, we get about 8 bank holidays a year. 3 of them for Christmas and New Year's, 2 of them for Easter, and then the other 3 are scattered through the year at semi-regular intervals, almost like a reward for working hard for the other months. These tend to lie either on a Friday or a Monday, so that they can be wrapped into the weekend. There is no celebration or national parties, just a lot of people letting their hair down and, I suppose if the opportunity arrives, climbing into the nearest train, car or aeroplane to get a long weekend mini break. But I bring up the subject of independence because there is a day, not a public holiday, but an important commemorative occasion that is celebrated across the United Kingdom and has been for over 4 centuries. Whilst the many other countries celebrate their ability to shrug off British rule, we kind of do the opposite. Guy Fawkes Night is named after the eponymous Guido Fawkes, a member of the 1605 Gunpowder Plot, an attempt by Catholic rebels to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament and kill King James I in the process. Had they succeeded, they planned to kidnap and install a Catholic queen and change the future of British politics forever. Guido Fawkes was discovered just after midnight, leaving the cellars beneath the House of Lords, carrying a lit lantern, a pocket watch, several slow matches and touchwood. When the cellar was searched, they discovered 36 barrels of gunpowder concealed beneath the firewood and coal, ready to be lit. Had Guy Fawkes not been discovered then, just hours later, the main component of the British political constitution would have been reduced to rubble and ashes in its entirety. In the following years, after the conspirators had been arrested and put on trial, a national act was passed encouraging priests to give special sermons about the rule of law and churches were encouraged to ring their bells. Over the centuries, the story passed into folklore, and the tradition evolved into what we now call Guy Fawkes Night, or colloquially as either Bonfire Night or Fireworks Night. 400 years later, hundreds of thousands of British citizens gather in parks or large garden spaces, and they celebrate the fact that Guy Fawkes failed to blow up the Houses of Parliament by setting alight to one just little bit of their remaining country. Sometimes scarecrows or effigies of Guy Fawkes are placed atop the bonfire to represent the sinners, and often there are large, extravagant fireworks displays once the fire has passed its peak. I've been to bonfires stacked 20 feet high, where the flames have reached to the heavens, and they were so bright that even from the far side of the park, it felt as though it was the middle of the day in a scorching heatwave. This cannot be good for the environment. And 4 centuries later, now the story of Guido Fawkes and his conspirators is a matter of historical record, and the world has moved far, far beyond the Protestant Catholic infighting that dominated Europe of the late medieval era. Like Christmas, Bonfire Night is a national celebration that seems to have partially lost its original meaning. Fortunately, businesses seem to regard the event, the burning of effigies of political dissenters, unsanitary enough not to overly commercialise it, and so all efforts have been piled into making Halloween a far larger event. Over the last few decades, Halloween in the United Kingdom has transformed into something much, much larger and all-encompassing than it ever was before. However, Halloween's close proximity to Bonfire Night in the United Kingdom has caused the two events to almost seem intermingled in a lot of people's eyes. Why should we fear the witching hour when in just a week we'll be setting fire to the sky? I sometimes wonder, in the post-Empire Britain, I have often looked at the effigies of Guido and wondered, are we celebrating that a man was prevented from blowing up the Houses of Parliament, or in a really quirky, cynical way, are we celebrating that he tried? Is this our little failed attempt at independence over the ruling classes who have straddled Britain ever since Tudor times? Is this too deep a question for me to address? However, in 2020, public bonfires to draw large crowds are not encouraged, for obvious reasons. And so I wondered what traditional activities I could turn to fill in the gap. And then I remembered a strange little diversion released by the British Broadcasting Company, the BBC, to celebrate Bonfire Night back in 2011. A fully playable computer game starring Matt Smith, Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill, reprising their characters from Doctor Who in a complete adventure game. The Gunpowder Plot is the 5th episode of this saga, as it was preceded by 4 episodes in 2010 that released alongside Series 5 of the resurrected television show. Matt Smith's arrival as playing the Doctor was almost a complete relaunch of the show. Not only did it have a new star, but a completely new production and writing team, and a change on the production values as the show had only just shifted to become high definition. The Moffat era showed a level of ambition in its complex storytelling, and there must have been a desire at the BBC to show that this was a multi-platform franchise. The BBC commissioned Sheffield-based video game developers, Sumo Digital, to produce these adventure games, and for nearly 7 years they hosted them for free, until a changing of licenses meant that they are now extremely difficult to get hold of. And Sumo Digital are a fascinating developer who have made themselves experts at offering their services and game design to whoever requires a bespoke game. The same year they released the adventure games for the BBC, they also released Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, which was a highly proficient game that only just failed to escape being called a Mario Kart clone. And Dead Space Ignition, a less successful puzzle spin-off to the space horror franchise. Despite their eclectic mix of projects, including both sports titles and racing games, this wasn't the first time Sumo Digital had taken on an adventure game, having been co-developers of Broken Sword, The Angel of Death, a 2006 adventure game that showcased their proprietary immersion engine. Unfortunately, Broken Sword 4 had mixed reviews, I think it's fair to say. The core experience was considered pretty solid, but the game had cut corners regarding things like character animations, and there were some other minor technical issues that just marred the game. It's a fine experience, it's a good game, but it lacks the final level of polish that I'd normally look for in the genre. A level of polish that the original 2D point-and-click broken sword game was famous for. What really put the nail in the coffin for this game for me personally was the way that exactly the same control concept was used in Funcom's adventure game Dreamfall, The Longest Journey, which came out the same year and showed how a direct control scheme could be incorporated into a point-and-click game concept with aplomb. I'm not claiming that Dreamfall is a masterpiece. The game has issues worthy of discussion for another time, but comparing it to Broken Age 3 and 4, you realise quickly how the slight variances in both the control scheme and just the necessary overall polish mount up to mar the experience. So, when approached by the BBC to produce a series of adventure games, I wonder if the conversation in Sumo Digital ever took place where they decided to do a Dreamfall. Because moving from Dreamfall chapters to the Doctor Who adventure games, the similarities in the control scheme are fascinating. You have direct control of your avatar, with a camera that snaps to behind them as the typical point of view. You interact with your environment, solve puzzles, combine items, and talk to strangers through scripted conversations to proceed. Only the adventure games are designed to be both freely downloadable experiences and far, far, far more child-friendly, with a relatively simple plot, a short runtime, and a narrow width for the genre. They are light, definitively not AAA experiences, but as they're free, that wasn't to be expected. Once again, the production values were put into the voice cast and the writing. The games just had to run and not be buggy. And this largely Sumo Digital managed to do with no problems at all. In 2010 there were 4 episodes released, each of them focusing in on a famous concept from the show: Daleks, Cybermen, exploring inside the TARDIS, and the Vashta Nerada from the then recent Stephen Moffat written episode Silence in the Library. 2010 was the year Stephen Moffat and Matt Smith relaunched the show with an all-new look and feel, and the adventure games perfectly blended into this new approach. And whilst none of them were cutting edge, they were at least competent, well voice acted, and most importantly, free additions to the core TV show. And they were so well received, with over 500,000 downloads in the first episode in just the first month, that the BBC was keen to commission a second series. This never happened, as the BBC was tempted by the console market, and so they abandoned the adventure concept in order to focus on the PlayStation compatible game The Eternity Clock. However, one single episode was made in 2011, and it focused on Guido Fawkes and his compatriots for a dramatic retelling of the Gunpowder Conspiracy. And yeah, it's fine. For a free game made in 2011, the graphics are more than adequate, hardly groundbreaking even for the time, but solid enough. Save for the fact several characters' eyes are blank, resulting in some horrific zombie-like stares which puncture what are meant to be dramatic moments, they actually look quite good. The main voice cast are on fine form. The pairing of Matt, Karen and Arthur were always a fantastic team, and each of them plays into their characters as well as can be expected. And they're joined by Ralph Little as Guy Fawkes, Alexander Vlahos as Robert Catesby, David Ames as Thomas Percy, and Miles Richardson as Black Rod. Fun fact, for years whilst Alexander Vlahos was playing Dorian Gray, I was convinced he was David Ames, whose run on Holby City began around the same time. The two of them have remarkably similar voices, considering they are very different people. So I was delighted to see them together in the same production, if only briefly. All of these put in fine performances directed by Gary Russell, and Miles Richardson is always excellent value for money. Then there is Amelia Fox as Lady Winters, and Dan Starkey as Field Major Karsh, representing the 2 alien menaces inserted into this historical reenactment, who both are fine. The rest of the cast is mixed, however. I can't criticise child actors too harshly, but the game gives 2 of them fairly significant roles to poor effect, and Phil Daniels puts in a particularly, perhaps deliberately, plummy performance as the town crier. So whilst the game is not a complete success, the core cast are strong, with only the minor performances standing out as problematic. The story starts with a focus on Guy Fawkes, but it devolves into an Alien Incursion plot that pitches the Rutans against the Sontarans in a battle for a lost Doomsday device. Fans of the show may delight in finally seeing these two monsters on screen at the same time, and the story intertwines both the historical continuity with what was known at the time about the Doctor's role in the Time War, to come up with a conclusion that pushes for peaceful solutions no matter what the cost. That is regards the alien menace. For the human cast, it is known from the start that the end is not going to be pleasant. Almost everyone featured is eventually destined to face the Hangman's Noose. However, whilst the setting of the Gunpowder Conspiracy turns out to be just that, a setting for a very different tale, it does hark back to one of the show's founding principles. When Sidney Newman devised the original concept of Doctor Who, all the way back in the 1960s, he wished both to entertain and to educate. Though there are no real collectibles or side missions in the Gunpowder Plot, the area is littered with historical features designed to explain the historical context of the Jacobean England. For a free experience whose target demographic is as wide as possible, possibly down to children of 6 or 7, the game does re-dramatise the key events of the original conspiracy with more detail than was strictly necessary. The game's one bonus feature is the presence of the mysterious silence. Black-suited aliens who appear and then disappear as you turn away, and they pass unnoticed through the world, who were Stephen Moffat's latest invention at the time this came out. In the end, the show leaves as Guido stands alone, match in hand, awaiting his destiny beneath the Houses of Parliament. The Doctor bids him farewell, stating that your place in history is assured. Guido Fawkes did indeed have an important part to play in the world, and centuries later he still has political significance. Learned professors have suggested that he is still toasted as the last man to have ever entered Parliament with completely honest intentions. Guy Fawkes' face went on to become a potentially powerful representation of postmodern anarchism in the late 20th century, inspiring the graphic novel V for Vendetta, which was turned into a motion picture film in 2005. This was then picked up by online hackers who used the face to represent their anonymous but potentially potent activities. Which brings me back to question what we really think of this man. By his own admission, Guy Fawkes was not the brains of the original conspiracy. That honour belonged to Richard Catesby. Guy was just the dupe, found holding the matches, in the wrong time at the wrong place. However misguided or heinous his intentions were, he was determined to carry them out to the best of his abilities. Do we burn effigies to damn or to celebrate him? Do people wear his face as a sign of our own fear of being recognised, or as a way to show solidarity with our common man? Sumo Digital's brief offering will shed no light on this mystery, but it could, perhaps, retell the story very competently for anyone looking to educate themselves. If nothing else, replaying this was a fascinating chance to recapture a lost episode of Matt Smith's tenure as the Doctor, as he's one of my favourite actors to have ever held the role, and that is no bad thing by any means.